it is great to have you with us and to be able to join us and just being open to picking up with us again after the conference last year, which we had so many notes and the comments just really affirming what you shared at that event. And so we're looking forward to having you with us today. Let me just, many of us know Christiana from the conference, and so we've been looking forward to this event for some time, and it's great to have you with us. And so I'm going to disappear from the screen, so you have some time, and then I'll kind of track the chat, and we're inviting people to make comments and post some questions in the chat box. And so we can then stop and fill those when you feel like there's a good space in the material that you want to present today.
Great. Okay. Great.
All right.
Wonderful. Well, hello, everyone. It is an honor. And for those of you whom I got to meet, I think it was last May, maybe. Hello again. And to new people, I can't see you, but I send greetings your way through the interwebs. Wow, and this is always an interesting experience because I'm literally looking at the screen and seeing myself and trusting that you're all there. So any waves, any comments, I welcome. I may not read them thoroughly, so I can stay focused, but I trust you're out there. So real quick, my name is Christiana Rice, and I'll tell you a little bit of my story, and then I just wanted to share some things that are kind of on my heart that feel like an important angle, I think, as far as wanting to be people of peace, particularly in the neighborhood and as communities. Some of the things I'm thinking about of what it means to be specifically conflict competent communities. So that's the angle I'm going to go with. And then I just, I welcome your questions, any comments that maybe I could speak a little bit more to. I usually prefer interaction, so we will pretend as though we're interacting more substantially here. So as way of background, I grew up in a culture that was not my my birth culture or the culture of my heritage of my family. So I was born here in the US, actually in Florida. And then when I was 4, my family moved to Tokyo, Japan. If you know anything about, it's kind of generalized to say Asian cultures, because actually, since I grew up in Asia, I'm very aware that every Asian country and even subcultures within Asian cultures are all unique and different, beautifully so. But there's kind of a general stereotype which comes for a reason that specifically, and I'll speak specifically for Japan, that it's a shame-based culture. It's a shame honor-based culture. And with that comes a lot of hierarchy and process for dealing with conflict, tension, difference, in a way that is more what we would call indirect. So there's a lot of indirect communication. So I came from a family, and even American stereotypically can be very more direct and outspoken and loud. And my family sort of zoomed into a culture where we had to learn for years and years what it meant to be a part of a culture that actually was more collective in nature, was more community oriented, had a hierarchy of honor and of shame, and implied that there were ways of communicating that needed to be indirect in order to produce the kind of synergy and peace that was necessary within a culture. So we went in as missionaries. I say we, it's easy for me to say we now. At the time, I didn't know that I was a missionary. In fact, was I a missionary? Not necessarily. I suppose my parents were, and I was just going to join and participate in this new life. They did a good job of helping us enjoy the process and become something along the way. But as I was in this life of integrating and enculturating, I realized that our discipleship, what it meant to follow Jesus in this place, particularly with the concepts of enculturation and the concepts of what it meant to become community with one another, it meant that we had to do diligence to understand the other and to find our sense of connection with people that were very different from us. So what was exciting for me, and what was a thing that I've continued to grow in, is, and actually just to track my life and my life story, to see that working or learning what it means to be committed communities with people that are different, whether those are visible differences, or, as we know, there are layers and layers of differences that we're not even paying attention to often, that exist within any community. That one of the things that makes us whole and actually makes us sacramental, kind of a sign of the grace of God in the way in which we are community together, is to know what it means to live and walk through our conflict and find redemption and reconciliation on the other side. So if anyone wants to give me a wave, I know that's a possibility. If this topic matters to you, you can even just, I'll just trust that you're waving. What does it mean to foster communities that are conflict competent? So if I could see you, I would say in this moment, what does competency mean to you? So maybe I'll give you a moment. When you think of the word competency, competent, what comes to mind for you? If you do want to comment, you're welcome to. Although I have noticed, oh, I got a wave, nice, thanks. Anyone want to give me, yeah, I'm going to experiment with this. Anyone want to give it a shot? How would you define competent, the word competency? I'll wait. Anyone? I think there might even be a little delay there.
It's the 2 to 3 minute rule before it's like something clicks in and.
Yeah, got it. Well, okay. Well, feel free to comment, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat section. So often some words that might come to mind for competency are, ability, knowledge. I like to even say embodiment. It's a little more, yeah, we got some ability to understand, to take command of a task. Okay, take command. So I'm really intrigued with words and definitions. And so even the word command, that's an interesting one. Somebody said effectiveness, understanding. So I'm going to go back to one of the words I said, which was embodiment, because I think it's a holistic. When we embody something, there is a sense of our physicality, our brain, which kind of connects with the understanding of the knowledge, and also our spirit. So if we just want to say body, mind, spirit. So to be competent is to embody or to know something with body, mind, spirit. So my hope is that I want to give us just a little quick glimpse into what it might look like to learn what to become, to embody a knowledge or a knowing, body, mind, and spirit, of how it is that we walk through conflict, to become people of peace in the world, communities of peace, in this world that so desperately needs us, needs everyone to be builders of peace, to be creators of peace, to be ones who nurture peace in the world. So let me see, I may do a screen share that might be a little too tricky. Let's see. You know what? I'm not going to do a screen share. But let me just give you a quick, there's a concept within restorative justice work, and I know I'm speaking with a group of people that has a long history and heritage of being people of peace. And maybe some of you are familiar with the concept of peace paths. So one thing, just a quick note, I've noticed that within communities, church communities, faith, however you would consider your community, maybe there's sub-communities or small groups or home groups within communities. So any way you group with others, I found that it's really important, and you can jot this down, to develop your own sense of a peace path, a pathway to peace. And often we think of that at macro levels. What does peacemaking look like, or even justice seeking look like at a macro level? However, I'm discovering that even communities, so everyday communities, can create peace paths. They do this a lot in schools as well. So two kids get in a fight, or maybe there's some bullying issues, and a lot of times schools will have what they call peace paths. They may even have visuals that show some principles and some pathways, you know, how they mediate, stuff like that. Well, how often do we do that in our communities, really readying us for what it means to become people of peace in and of ourselves? So in the Gospels, it talks about we've been given this ministry of reconciliation, excuse me, in the New Testament, on what is the ministry of reconciliation. I think the ministry of reconciliation begins with our inner life, peacemaking of the soul. It begins with peacemaking in community, and then peacemaking in the world. So this particular webinar is focusing a little bit more on peacemaking in community. Okay, so think on that. If anyone again wants to comment, any questions, anything that stands out to you, I welcome those. And I understand there is a slight delay. So here are a few things, and I'm going to keep this really, really simple, and then I'm going to welcome your questions or comments. Dan, if you also want to moderate any of those, you can do that as well. So let me first define peace. Again, if I know I'm in some ways speaking to the choir here, but we could define peace as the holistic repair of relationships, and that would be any relationship, to the land, to ourselves, to one another, to God. So if it's the holistic repair, then we need a holistic approaches. I remember actually, so I live in a communal house here I'm in urban San Diego, and I hit points. We have created a peace path in our community here, and we hit points all the time. I remember recently, I actually was, the kitchen is one of the most, it's a ripe territory for conflict in our home, maybe in your home as well, partially because we have so many people utilizing that space, often bumping up against each other, whether it's scheduling or whether it's breaking something or whether it's literally bumping up against each other when we're trying to wash the dishes. We don't have a dishwasher, so it's a hand washing process. And if you can imagine, there are varying philosophies on how one should wash dishes. It's not as simple as it seems. And when you have jurisdiction over your sink, you and maybe your immediate nuclear family, it could still, you know, but you kind of have dynamics where you get to set the tone of this is how it's done and this is how we do it and done. Well, when you live in a communal house like mine, everyone brings their opinions to the sink. So I want us to kind of look at the microcosm of the sink. There are so many ways to wash dishes. So we have found that the analogy of the sink has been one of the most formative things for us in community, where sometimes, you know, we make choices to wash something according to what we think is clean. We make choices to bring things up to each other, to avoid the conflict, to sometimes call out each other's mistakes. So let's just say, hypothetically, I was recently down, not hypothetically, this is a true story. I was recently down at my kitchen sink and noticed that one of my housemates did not use soap in washing the dishes. I approached him, and we both know, you know, we've agreed to use soap in the house. And he actually came back at me with kind of a theory or a theoretical shift that he had made, feeling as though soap was unnecessary for certain dishwashing, like say a glass that had just used water. So in that moment, I could have chosen. I was at a precipice or at a crossroads, and I think maybe we all resonate with this a little bit. We choose our methods of conflict, of dealing with conflict. And by the way, real quick asterisk here, asterisk is that if the definition of conflict in and of itself is not bad. In fact, conflict is a neutral term. Conflict just is. It's a part of reality. It's a part of our everyday lives. It's how we deal with conflict that makes it something that either can be a form of division. It can also be just simply a form of mediation, but it has the opportunity to be a form of transformation. So John Paul Lederach is his work in peace building. He defines conflict, the work of peacemaking, as conflict transformation. So here we are at the sink, and I'm at that point where I can choose to either engage in conflict in the way that's most natural to me, whether that's attacking, whether that's avoiding, whether that's passive aggression, whether that's stirring up emotion. And I think here's what I wanted to share with you is when you have a peace path and you have made a commitment together. So commitment is really important as communities around the peace paths that are going to nurture what it means to be conflict competent communities. When you've made a commitment, you actually can trust each other through the processes of conflict transformation. So what I normally would have done, the kind of conflict response that is natural to me, is go into task mode. I would have spoken pretty directly. It's kind of my MO. And I also maybe perhaps would have just taken responsibility and gotten it done myself. So those are kind of the things. I kind of go into task mode when it comes to conflict. I become more heady and not as emotionally driven. I kind of go into my head and well, here's what has to be done. We got to fix this. Let's get this done. That's not often helpful for everyone. So in this instance, I decided to approach it because I know that we have a committed relationship with each other. I decided to approach this instance with the compassion that we've committed to. So compassion is a commitment in our community. With honor, so we've committed to honoring one another in our community, and with honesty, so with an honest account. However, that's not honesty is not then an open door to raw communication that actually could be hurtful, because then that's actually selfishness. So a selflessness of seeking to understand before being understood is another part of our commitment. So in that instance, I approached my dear housemate and told him, I asked and invited him into a process of conflict transformation where we could talk about the differences between the results of washing a dish without soap and washing a dish with soap. And what we came to was not a full agreement, but we decided to keep engaging when we disagreed. So engagement during disagreement. Engage while you disagree. Engagement, disagreement. We decided to keep doing that, and we came to a place of beautiful submission to one another that I will have to say, in the end, my theory around washing dishes with soap did win out. Pat on the back for me, maybe. And however, what was forged between us, the kind of love and commitment that was continued to be established between us, was really beautiful. So that's just one little example. I'm going to walk you through 3 quick steps that I've noted within communities as an important process of our peace path. So one is the process of remembrance. So remembrance would be the first step. If I had a whiteboard, I'd be writing that up, but I don't. And in many ways, you could actually even pick apart that word and say to remember is to remember. In fact, when you become disconnected, one of the most important processes is to remember, to come back together, and what that can be, how that can begin is to practice remembrance together. So, what does it look like in your community to remember? Remember your story. Remember who you are. Remember your commitments, and most importantly, to remember who God is. So, as you engage in practices of remembrance, as a regular, ongoing a rhythm of your community, it actually remembers you to become the people that you know you're meant to be, and it can prepare you for the inevitable conflict that will come upon you. The next one is to rehearse. So these are all going to be our words. To rehearse. So I could do this also if you were here with me. I would say, please, what are some words that come to mind when you think of the word rehearse? This is a tricky one. Rehearsal seems like it's not real, but play with me, play this out with me a little bit. I think to rehearse some things means we practice. We do this all the time in life. You have to practice things in order to be ready for, say, the performance, or to be ready for when the rubber meets the road. In many ways, you could say worship or collective worship, and worship in the form of singing is a rehearsal for when we say things like, God be our strength in times of trouble. We may or may not be in that depths of trouble in that moment, but in many ways, we're rehearsing the kind of faith that's going to be required to continue to move, to walk on in life. When we're together, when we share meals, we're rehearsing the kind of hospitality that we want to extend beyond us. So rehearsal within conflict transformation means you can actually practice the kinds of skills necessary for conflict, for working through conflict, both within community as well as in our contexts. You can begin to rehearse those. That means you can even role play. You can model. You can talk about conflict processes or ahead of time before it happens. Other ways that's played out within the communities that I work with, and this is where you can do things like, hey, why don't you dig into your emotional intelligence levels as communities? Who are each of you? What are your conflict resolution styles? What are your stories? How does your story, so remember in the remembrance, how does your story influence who you are and maybe some of your trigger points? What are your triggers in general? What kind of communication? What are the rubs that you have? What are the rubs that you bring? What is some of the stuff that you've already experienced, and learning about each other, learning about, even when you look at your neighborhood, the story of your neighborhood, learning those things become rehearsals, because when things rise to the surface, when conflict descends upon you, somehow by the grace of God, these kinds of rehearsals can enable you, if you're willing, so there's always the will, can enable you to, hey, that sounds like people are commenting a lot about questions or how to see questions. I'd say let's cut it. It's not really coming out clearly, so don't worry about the comments at this point. But we will leave a little time for that at the end. And I think the Q&A section might be a helpful spot to add that. So it will enable you. It's amazing to me how many times I've watched communities who have been diligent to rehearse, be ready when the fire hits. So that's point number, or pathway number 2, or maybe you could say steps on the pathway number 2. So remembrance, rehearsal, and the third is restoration. Restoration, to me, is when you are fostering the kind of love and care and affirmation that's required to continue to stay in a place of restoration. So you could almost think of, if you think of tending, another word would be tending or cultivating. I also, in my book, I use the analogy of the midwife. So in many ways, if we believe God is birthing the new creation, which is the creation of peace and equity, we believe God is birthing that in our lives, in our communities, in our world, then we get to attend. It's a restorative practice. Some of the ways we can do that in community, we can do it proactively. We also get to do it as it comes. But things like confession. So I've found that confession is one of the most restorative practices in community. And I don't necessarily mean that you're going pointing fingers or you're telling somebody, confessing some terrible thing you've done, but more a posture of examine and doing that together as communities to share your growth, to share your honest process of your own formation. That kind of confession, creating space for confession, is a restorative practice and a peacemaking pathway. Other things, playing together, celebrating together. These are restorative practices. You're actually tending to and nurturing the life of the community in joy. Another simple practice that we've done that has actually become, I would say, one of the more restorative, sort of restorative rhythms for the last 10 years in our community that we've seen others communities enact, is the way we celebrate not only birthdays, but significant moments. We also grieve. We also grieve deeply. And to be honest, that's also restorative, partially because, and it kind of goes back to the remembrance, and I would also say they're pretty cyclical, but when, say, there's a birthday and you are focusing, you're celebratory, you're honoring someone, and you speak words of affirmation. Here's what it does for conflict formation, conflict transformation. You acknowledge, you name, and you begin to see the dignity in that other person, in that person on their special day. So you say things like, you are such a loving person. And then what that does for you is it's restoring, it's healing the community, so that when that person makes mistakes or irritates you or lets you down or betrays, you still somehow can uphold their dignity because you've practiced these restorative ways of affirming one another. So confession, affirmation is the second one. Check-ins, so allowing space for people to check in with themselves and then to check in the community. How are we doing as a community? Storytelling is another restorative practice. So when you tell stories of just general everyday life stories, maybe stories of the life of God among you. These are restorative practices. And then the last one I said too was the practice of play. Don't forget to play, to be silly, to sing karaoke, to dance in the streets. Those are restorative practices that you would be surprised, and probably many of you already know this, but these are ways in which we can walk the path of peace to become conflict competent communities. So I'm going to pause there. Stan, if you're still able to interact with me, what do you think would be best for our last, I think, 20 minutes as far as a little bit of interaction?
Well, just a couple things here. Or was that? Just some of the things that people commented on in terms of what they saw as being competent. And there's parts too that what you mentioned that speak into how we function biologically. So when you're talking about compassion and task, those actually, the brain can't do both at the same time. The body can't do both at the same time. And then also I was just appreciating the practices that you mentioned, because it also opens up, it triggers different kind of bodily chemicals that are all more accepting to each other or more feeling threatened. And so those kind of dynamics, I just love the way that you weave that in and how that plays. So then, how is it then that we work at, providing those practices, but that it then works then through a larger community so that it's mirrored? Uh-oh, you got muted. Unmute. There, oops.
Oh.
There we go.
There we are. It said the host muted me. I won't take it personally, Stan. Yes, great question. And of course I love the analogy of, even just to say we are a body, but even just looking at physiological dynamics of how our bodies function, and therefore how it is that we function as communities. I would even just pause and say, my experience with conflict is that it is a physiological experience. So just really quick touching on that, even as I bring up this topic, which I knew actually wasn't necessarily this was something I felt compelled to speak about today, but I don't know that this was actually in our notes in preparation for this time. So I would even guess, and I would say to everyone listening, take a moment right now to kind of attend to your body. And when you think of the word conflict, and when you think of the work that it takes to nurture this kind of health, it can produce some physiological responses. Sometimes maybe some of you feel a little bit of just heavy breathing, or your heart racing, or clammy hands, or sometimes you can get flushed. I've done this enough with people, even in the moment, just to acknowledge that this is not an easy topic. And that's why we have a lot of coping mechanisms that try to get us to, especially if any of us have had difficult stories in our past, which statistically most of us have with regard to conflict, whether that was just the chaotic, communication styles or the dysfunctions within our families. So then to think about becoming communities that know how to walk the path of peace through conflict transformation, it's hard work, and it is costly, but it is the healing, I think, that the Spirit is inviting us into, which requires a full life engagement. And I also want to say that there's safety and protection, and there's wisdom that has to be walked out in this process. So just a quick note on that. And then quick, Stan, when you talk about mirror, are you speaking of mirroring to one another? Or are you speaking to mirror into kind of the wider community into which we're living life?
Both.
Great. Yeah, well, let's see which angle I would want to go on. I'm actually gonna go because I think missiologically, we potentially forget that who we are and who we are together is just as important, if not more important, than what we do in the world. So if we are fantastic, advocates and activists and justice seekers and compassionate mercy givers, if we're fantastic at that for others, but meanwhile our community and even our inner lives are suffering and overgrown and disconnected and chaotic and unable to uncover the mercy of Jesus that can heal us, it will, if it hasn't already, it will inevitably impact the kind of presence of love and peace that we can be in the world. It will. So, so part of the reason that I think this ministry of reconciliation begins with us is because we do get to mirror. So this, I know there's different ways of playing out that even metaphor, but we get to mirror the love and life of Jesus in the world. So when people look at us, I mean, could that be true, God? I ask that of myself every day, could it be true that who I am in my family and my community, that we could mirror the very life and healing and love of Jesus in the world just by who we are together? I think there's something to that. I think that might be this radical invitation of God, of what it means to be communities of love and communities of peace. So that's real quick. I also say in our worshiping community, even on Sunday, we integrate our children a lot in the way in which we worship, and which I know you guys do as well. And we spoke with them about what it means to be a community of love, and peacemaking is at the heart of what we try to become and teach. And I mean, this stuff, I wouldn't be sharing this if I didn't feel with integrity that it's something I'm working out in my own life. But it was really beautiful as we were sharing. It was actually St. Patrick's Day, and sharing about how it was that St. Patrick formed these, what we were calling, in the language I was using with the kids, was these communities of love. And there are key values and principles, and one of the core things was peacemaking, which meant an invitation to become community with those who maybe were different from you. And that, I'm pretty certain that was messy, and that required an intentional pathway that somehow they had to learn. So so that's how I'd respond to the mirroring in the wider community, the world into which we are a part.
And could you say a bit more about how does a community build, or even an individual, how do they build up the value of peacemaking? Because that doesn't happen automatically. So how do the practices then shape movement towards a value, or what is the connection between practices and values?
Ooh, great. Well, so a community is made up of individuals, and those individuals all have a story, and all have desires, and all have values. And I think those things are inseparable. Story, values, desire. Actually, I would probably go in that order. Story, values, desire. The question is, have we uncovered those? And then out of uncovering individual values, because people do what they want. So they're a part of the community because there is something they want, right? Which is a beautiful way in which I think we've been designed as the human community. So I would say, and this kind of goes, to me, this goes in the sort of rehearsal category, if I'm sticking it in those three words that I've been playing with today. So part of the rehearsal meaning the practice, rehearsal, another word would be practice, would be an uncovering of the individual story and values and desires that make up the whole. And then out of that, how you identifying what are the unique common values that we all, so when I talk about commitment, you're right, I am saying let's commit to a set of values. Some of the things that church communities can often do for reason and even in many ways it's served us, is that we set some values, and often they're values that are aligned with maybe a set of a belief system, so we value, maybe we value peace because peace is a part of our denominational, call, and we value community, and we value, simplicity. So you're saying all those things, and it may still be true of the community, but it's kind of an imposition if we don't say, hey, these may be the values, but there are actually a collective value of this unique group of people that can be fostered, can be uncovered. And then, I would even say it's important. We do this every year, again, and every community is different, and I don't think there's the perfect way to do it. But to uphold those, like re-examine those values each year. Maybe there's a new shift of wording. Maybe your word of hospitality, maybe you really meant maybe generous living. Maybe just a tweak of that language can help the community live into it more authentically. So the process of uncovering individual values, because people need to know, everybody also has a life outside of the worshiping community, right? So you're living your life, and if your values are too aligned with what you think you're supposed to do as a Christian or as a disciple of Jesus, then I think then again, people are taking on something that's been given to them versus uncovering something that I think the divine's working out through them. So there's a holy practice of honoring and discovering people's individual values, and then coming together around a set of core values. And out of that, you write your peace path. So therefore, because we are this together, because these are our shared values, this is why we want to commit to this, and this. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, by the way, I share this kind of remembrance, rehearsal, restoration. That's a very overarching pathway that I think each community should then write their own very specific and unique pathway out of their values and identity as a community. So that's a bit of a differentiation there as well.
So what assumptions do individuals or communities make that can stand in the way or create obstacles to working towards competent conflict leadership? And so what are some of the assumptions that you've wrestled with, or that you've seen other groups wrestle with as they try to work through being conflict competent?
Yes, and wouldn't that be an interesting dialogue with all the rest of you on this lovely webinar? But since I still have the floor, well, we've actually, I've done some good broad work in trying to identify what you would call obstacles, or maybe one of the things we've begun to call them is our myths. So the myths that we've bought into, and every myth, by the way, has an element of truth, right? It's come from somewhere. So for example, one myth would be the myth of I'm going to find my best friend in the community, in the church, And so then people go to the church, the church is that place where I'm going to find that best kindred spirit friend. And for a lot of people, that doesn't happen. And so then you resent the church because they weren't the best friends you ever had. Now they may be your committed community. You you have a purpose together. And you are going to have friends outside of the community, obviously, outside of the church. You're going to have many friends. And the fact that they're not all in the same place, that's okay and normal. But that's a myth that I think holds people back from even developing intimacy within a community. Because I don't think community is friends. I actually think community is body of Christ, which you will hopefully and will make friends. But you're a people of God together who has a purpose and call together. As disciples together. So that's a little bit of a myth. Another myth would be there's a myth of binary, that community is binary. So a myth that, we're either community or we're not. If we were truly a community, we would make an annual covenant. So that's how my community functions. We make an annual covenant commitment to who we are going to be together. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a church community that also is committed to one another, but has a different expression. So community looks different in a lot of different ways. Another thing would just be that the myth of that we're synonymous, or that we are the same, that we should have perfect harmony, that community means I'm going to have full agreement with everyone. Even though I think intellectually we can all say that, unfortunately, we still tend to do church community with an assumption, or we have taken on this myth that we should all be the same, which again, we know diversity is beautiful, but I think part of it's because we're still learning how to create and foster unity within our differences. So that's where kind of some of this stuff falls. A barrier to what I'm talking about would be an assumption or a myth that it should always be harmonious, and that harmonious means synonymous. So those are just a few. We have a few more, but that kind of comes to mind. I'd love to hear others on some of the things that have been barriers for peacemaking or for becoming communities of peacemaking.
Are there any others that would like to type in a question or comment to Christiana for her to respond to? Now it plays in the background music.
Yeah, I'm trying to scroll through here as well. Again, I know it looks like there's a bit of a delay.
Oh, okay. So how can a church community model Christ's love and take that to the community when we have difficulty modeling it?
Yeah.
Okay, now we got some good questions coming through. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Paul and John. And okay, let's see. How can the church community model Christ's love and take that to the community we have difficulty modeling? Well, yeah, these are great. I'm going to see if I can kind of synthesize. We only have a few more minutes here. Yeah, I will just say that I think this question of, so you asked if I have, somebody asked if I have a process of discovering values. Yes, we do. We have a something we call Life Compass, and it's essentially helping communities through the individuals discover, if kind of God's dream for the world is our true north, and then how do we align our lives as individuals to that, and then find the collective values. So we do have a process. However, I would say there are a lot. Trust your own abilities to create some of this stuff. So you can go research things and find, like, hey, discovering values. There are ways, but then in open dialogue, enter into these difficult conversations with your community. I mean, that's the trust that actually you have assets and resources within the people that already are in your community, more than the experts out there that have written the books or have, giving you the 10-week series. I think the more people uncover that within your own stories and within your own creativity, you can and learn from others, of course, but just, I would say, don't underestimate the assets that already exist within your community. As someone said, yes, family systems, the systems that you have inherited, even as your church form, they all are both a gift and a barrier. And they should be examined, because when you align with values, then forms get to be creative, right? So how can you uphold, or can you stay foundational to the core values? And for those of us who are who attain to the values of Jesus, align with the values of Jesus, led by the Holy Spirit, can we stay true to those and then look very different within each of our communities? Yes, and I've seen it, and I've seen it all over. I think it's the future of the church, is that we will continually look different in our forms while we still stay true to our core identity of what it means to be communities of faith. So that's something I'm excited about, and I do think this uncovering of values is one of our pathways. A couple other.
Sarah's question.
Yes, I see that, Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Well, yes. I mean, this is everything, isn't it? So one of her questions was like, and here in San Diego, we're right along the U.S.-Mexico border, of course, with some of the tragedies that happen with our Muslim brothers and sisters within their worshiping space. We are aware that conflicts, hate crimes, all the isms that actually have caused more division, and that the heart of Jesus is that we would be bridge builders and peace builders within all of these communities. So how it plays out is, I think we first have to ask, who is the other? And again, by the way, this begins within, this begins internally. The kinds of resentments and divisions and conflicts that you have allowed to harbor in your own local church community, they will impact your ability to love your neighbor across the border, to love your Muslim sister or brother, to love the homeless community that is always always has folks against them, whether or not they should be living in your quote unquote your space. So all those things interplay, and every peacemaker of history that has changed the world of our known world thus far, I've found, and as I've looked deeply in my own process, and of course limited ways, so they will all say, attend to your heart, attend to your close relationships, and do that as you're also loving your neighbor. So I think the whole love your neighbor as yourself, I think the as yourself means both our internal who we are, but also as yourself, our community. How are we loving ourselves, loving one another, so that we may continue to love our neighbors well. Time-wise, I think we're up, but these are good questions coming through.
And then also we have a person that's just sharing a reflection that this conversation is timely in light of current global events. And I would say, hey, give a shout out to the new church advisory committee that suggested we do this and the topic. So great group, thumbs up.
Thank you, everyone.
So just a moment, Christiana, if you have do you have a couple more minutes?
Sure. Yep.
And
I got on 10 minutes late, so okay. All the tech issues.
Well, maybe there's a couple things that you want to respond to, but I'm going to just quickly paste in the CEU link, and if you go to this link, you'll be able to click on the link. It'll take you to the form. You can fill it out and submit it. If it does not open up, you can copy this link and paste it in. Also, if you have challenges getting in sometimes, you can contact me at this email address. So we got it covered. All right, Christiana, is there what thoughts come to mind as you've reflected and shared, a number of different ideas and strategies, and you've seen some of the questions? What parting thoughts would you, or challenges or encouragement would you have for those attending today?
Well, I think I would say I we all are sister, our best friend, whoever, you know, for my case, maybe my husband, you know, whoever one of those, that close person is, and you know what it's like when you're in the heat of one of your worst fights, right? And you're right in the middle of it, and the fire is turned up, and you get that, I mean, maybe I'm alone on this, but I doubt it. And you get that feeling that kind of bubbles up, and you feel like, I don't know if I can get out of this. I feel stuck. I feel like I could be consumed by this. Are we going to find a way out? And then you get out of it, and sometimes it has a healthy degree of resolution, and it deepens love, and sometimes it doesn't. And a lot of us have stories where we have heartache and heartbreak as a result of unresolved or unhealed or frayed ends with relationships, and especially it hurts the most when it's the people closest to us, right? Well, I want to say to you that you're not alone. I do want to say you're not alone. I want to say that in your community context, you're not stuck, and God, and I think that us being able to become conflict competent followers of the peacemaker Jesus is both for our own healing and for the healing of the world. So I say that to say, both just in kind of, you know, solidarity, I understand this is a hard topic, and it is timely. It's timely for all of us, both in our interpersonal relationships and in our world. But there are some really fantastic resources of folks that can come alongside you. Of course, I offer the work I do, and stand to if there are ways that we could think creatively on follow-up opportunities to work with some of the communities in something like uncovering values in community, you know, that can help people create peace paths that I think lead us to be more faithful builders of peace in the world. I just would love to support in whatever way I can in that, and also resource in other ways too. So bless you guys as you live and walk this faithful, long obedience in the same direction toward peace.
Yeah. There's a couple good resources out there when speaking about how we get caught up into the freeze, fear, or flight. Doug Knoll, it's Noll, and his book is De-Escalate. He's an attorney. Actually, he's a consultant on conflict transformation. He's based out of Fresno, and is connected to the Mennonites up there. Also there's to be able to move forward too, it seems like we have to de-escalate ourselves, or do that emotional audit which you mentioned earlier. What is our emotional intelligence? Because otherwise we stay so emotionally high and triggered that it makes it impossible. So yep, Google Doug Knoll.
Yep. I'll also give I work with an organization called the Global Immersion Project. They are a peacemaking training organization, and they do everything from immersion trips into areas of global conflict as learning immersive peacemaking trips to become everyday peacemakers. But then they have developed a lot of tools to help communities and people become engaged with peacemaking practices in their local context as well as within their communities. So that's a really a wonderful resource as well.
Yep. All right, Christiana, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
And we will have you back again.
Okay, and good. Bless you all around your kitchen sink when you're just trying to make peace as you're washing dishes. All right, thank you, Stan.
Blessings to you.
Bye.
And everyone that connected, we appreciate you being here and participating. And if you have any questions or anything, just feel free to follow up with my email, and we'll try to respond as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Blessing and goodwill to all of you. Bye-bye.